So, Andrew Hardy from Petaluma, thank you for coming and tasting some wines with us today. We've got a range of wines that we want to see. But where's Petaluma at the moment? What's the philosophy behind the wine in these kind of modern, competitive wine times? I guess
it's still very much sticking to what we've always been doing, which is the distinguished vineyards, as the term was phrased, and old vine material, especially when you look at the Chardonnay, Riesling and the Reds from Coonawarra. Obviously, we're mucking around with different varieties in different regions again, but it's pretty much saying evolving the styles, I guess, and staying true to what we've always done.
Of course, and obviously the Shiraz and the Viognier are more recent additions, but the Shiraz especially has been met with a lot of critical acclaim, I guess, which is great news for the hills. Yeah. And obviously great news for Petaluma. 2010 Riesling vintage has been...
I reckon this has been bottled since August. 2010, I think, is one of those. It's probably not the best vintage we've ever done, but you can't keep claiming that every year.
No.
But it's in terms of where it's at, it's in the top echelon, I think, of Rieslings. 2010 was just about perfect in the growing season. We didn't have too many heat spikes, all the sort of things that have been publicised about climate change. It was early again, but not as early as 09 and 08. And
picking date-ish?
We started last week in Feb and finished in early March, which is still a lot earlier. When I started in the business in 82, we would never have thought of picking Riesling in February. So, it was always March into April picking. So we've had a run of early vintages, which has been interesting to management-wise. But it's also one of those things. We're rolling with climate change. We're seeing it. If you grow stuff and you've got plants in the ground,
hands on the soil,
you see climate change.
Of course. I think actually that's my favourite since 05. I think it's got really nice lines. Got that talky minerality kind of to it. Some of them can be a bit kind of on the back palate, quite creamy and rich for a Riesling style, whereas this is really kind of nice, firm and fresh. And
I think that's the nice thing about the 2010s is they're very full flavoured. So it almost tastes sweet.
Yeah.
The wine's dry, but it almost tastes sweit. And I think that's really a function of the year. And the power of Clare comes through in that glass, I think.
No, I think that's actually a really good vintage of that, and it's nice to see. It's nice to see, even in warmer vintages, still showing, I guess, the classic line and length that we...
The way we end up measuring the seasons is kind of skews the whole theory about the warm season, because we'd finished picking in early March, and then we had that typical South Australian Indian summer where it just stays beautiful and warm all through March. Yeah. And ramps the temperature numbers up so that the season looks like it was a hot one. Yeah. In fact, we'd already picked the grapes.
Awesome. And is floration earlier as well? So in terms
the whole season has gone.
Right.
It's gone a month.
But you're still having the same length of season.
Yep. Length of season is exactly the same.
Right.
It's just that everything's gone flat. Bud burst, flowering. Everything's earlier. So
lovely. So our next one we're going to look at is the 08, just released 08 Chardonnay.
Petaluma Chardonnay.
Yep. Indeed, Petaluma Chardonnay.
And again, you talk about what we're doing with wine styles in the hills, and very much 08 is a function of the vintage. It's a big, rich vintage, and the wines are big and rich, and you can't get away from that.
No.
But I think also there's a delicacy and a finesse. You still get that lovely white peach nectarine flavour on the palate that Piccadilly Valley especially has become famous for. So I think another good example of a lovely vintage from Piccadilly.
I think again it stays pretty fresh. The alcohol's like 13.5, 14. But it still has that freshness in the back palate. Like sometimes in those warm vintages, you've got the front foot impact and then the back is a bit flatter. Whereas again, it's got some, and the oak's pretty well integrated.
And lovely oak. And I think the thing about Piccadilly is it retains that. You do get that lovely acid retention. And that's one of the things, I guess, when you think about evolution of Australian winemaking, we've gone from growing anything anywhere to saying, right, we need to actually be in the right regions for the right varieties. And I think in a vintage like 08 was a difficult warm vintage. I think it shows the strength of a region like Piccadilly Valley that really stands out.
Yeah, no, you still get the diurnal range, don't you? You still get the cool nights, warmer days.
We've got warmer days than we normally get in Piccadilly, and that's a function of the year. But even if it gets to 35, 38 degrees in Piccadilly, you still get really cold nights. So as you say, the diurnal variation is still with us.
Of course. So now we're lucky enough to be tasting the 07, obviously the Tiers Chardonnay, which is pretty impressive little piece of soil. How big? I mean, how big is Tiers in total?
It's about 7 acres all up, and we've been using it was one of the first plantings in the hills. It's the vineyard right at the winery, and we've been making single vineyard Chardonnay from there since 1990, or released the 1996 in early 98, early 99. So we've had 10 or 12 vintages of straight varietal wines.
Yeah, and it's nice, and I mean it's just a nice, I guess, difference between the 08 in terms of like it really shows that that chalkiness. I think you see often see in the Tiers vineyard. You see
I think that's one of the hallmarks of Tiers, and interestingly, it's one of the warmer slopes in the Adelaide, in the vineyards in Piccadilly that we do from one of the lower slopes, but it's north facing, and we do get. It's always been that really structural wine that you get just that lovely structure on the palate, your nuts and even a touch of honey, but really it also still has that beautiful lemon zest as well.
How do you see this in terms of, I guess, past Tiers vintages? Like this seems, are they tightening up in style?
Winemaking wise, viticulturally pretty similar, but winemaking wise I'm doing a little bit more whole fruit, a little bit less malo, and a little bit less new oak. So I'm sort of trying to tone that, if you like, the winemaking artifact back a little bit, and bringing out the fruit quality. Yeah,
which is the modern Australian style, isn't it? But it's obvious. I mean, Tiers has always shone through whether it's various releases as being, really. Yeah. I mean, pretty much the pinnacle of Adelaide Hills Chardonnay.
And it's always been, we've always released this one with quite some age. So it's always had 2 or 3 years in bottle before it comes out.
So this has had 3 years, but it's still firm, it's still tight, it's still, and still, relatively youthful. Look at the colour. I mean, there's still some green hues in there. It's clearly going to kick on for a while.
It is one of the, unashamedly one of the strongest vineyards that goes into the Petaluma label. It always stands out year in, year out as that structural wine. So it's lovely to do it.
Now, I guess, 07 Coonawarra vintage was the frost vintage, wasn't it? I mean, how much fruit did you lose?
We've got happily in our little vineyard, Evans Vineyard in Coonawarra, which was planted in the late 60s. We've got sprinklers. We put sprinklers on it after the frost in 1983. Yep. We got wiped out in 83, completely wiped out, and so we've got sprinklers. So we were able to protect the young shoots. We had 28 frosts in the spring of 06, leading into the 07 vintage. Yep. Including late ones in November, which is there's an old saying that if you don't get you won't get a frost after Melbourne Cup, which is kind of crazy because who cares about when Melbourne Cup is? But we did get frost after that, and we were one of the only people down there that could protect our whole vineyard. Right. So we actually, funnily enough, we had to go and fruit thin. So once we hit veraison, when the berries changed colour, we actually had to go and cut fruit off because we had too much on the vine to reduce the crop. So we had to all intents and purposes, a normal vintage. Right.
I mean, it's pretty interesting how people would think, how does water, protect against frost? But the water covers the buds.
Yeah. So the sprinklers are going, and the water covers. At this stage, there was shoots. The first one was shoots about 1 inch long, and the water freezes at 0 or just above 0 or just at 0, and the tissue won't freeze until the vine tissue won't freeze until much colder than that -2, -3. Yeah. So that insulating layer of water actually insulates the young shoots. Yeah. And what happened, unfortunately, in Coonawarra that year, we had a whole lot of normal frost, which is the cold air rises up from the ground. And then we had an inversion frost, or a black frost, or a hoar frost, depending on which way you call it. And that's cold air coming in from above, and then drops down. And what happened was the people that had fans, the frost fans, they actually dragged the cold air down and fried everything. So the only protection in spring of 06, leading into 07 vintage, was sprinklers.
Right. And how do you see in terms of quality? I mean, obviously you weren't affected by frost, but 07 vintage. It seems a bit ungainly in its youth to me. The tannins are kind of sticking out a bit, and the fruit's not as perfumed, I guess, as maybe probably 06 is probably a pretty good example of a good vintage.
I think 07's will prove for us, because as I say, we're one of the only ones down there with an 07. I think it'll prove to be a very long-lived wine. I agree with you at the moment. I mean, this wine is unashamedly. Petaluma Coonawarra is unashamedly made for aging. Of course. It's always had a reputation for aging. So I think at the moment I agree with you. It's a young wine. It's been in bottle. It was bottled early 09, so it's been in bottle a year and a half. To me, it needs another 5 years before it's really going to be hitting its straps. Yeah. And you know, when you're combining Cabernet, Merlot, Shiraz, and Petit Verdot,
Yeah.
I think you need a little bit of time for all that to come together.
Bit of that Petit Verdot kind of grip there, isn't there? And acidity, that kind of, you know, that.
It's that really black. I mean, when you make the wine, it's that really black, intense.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's also got quite a lot of violet, so you get some nice floral in there as well. But very, very tannic.
Lovely. Well, Andrew, thank you for coming in, checking some wines, and you know, we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.